Nobody came to her mother's funeral, not her husband, not his family, not a single person from the billionaire dynasty she'd married into. While she stood alone in an empty church, they were posting champagne toasts at their Christmas gala. She stared at her phone, watching them laugh and celebrate, and realized with perfect clarity that her husband had no idea who he'd actually married. The devastated wife grieving alone? She controlled the fortune. And the empire he thought he'd built was about to crumble the moment she typed 3 simple words. Welcome back, my beautiful family, to Mr. Crown Stories. If no one told you today, let me tell you this: you are stronger than every storm that tried to break you. You are worth more than the silence you've accepted. I create these stories for hearts like yours, wounded but undefeated, searching for light after darkness. If this story touches your soul, click subscribe, drop a comment saying I am here, and tell me where you're watching from. Tomorrow brings another story of strength rising from ashes, and you deserve to witness it. May your heart find peace, your burdens grow lighter, and your spirit remember its power. We walk this journey together, heart to heart, strength to strength. Now, let us begin. The cathedral devoured her whole, its vaulted ceiling stretching into shadows that seemed to mirror the hollow ache consuming her chest. Deborah Betts stood beside the mahogany coffin, her trembling hand resting on wood polish so smooth she could see her own reflection staring back. Hollow eyes, lips pressed together to trap the scream building in her throat, skin that looked ghostly pale under the flickering candlelight. Her mother, Patricia Green, lay inside. Dressed in the elegant navy dress she'd worn to Deborah's wedding 5 years ago. The dress she'd saved 6 months to purchase because she wanted to look dignified when her daughter married into the Betts dynasty. The bitter irony of that dress now burned like acid in Deborah's throat. December wind rattled the stained glass windows, making the saints and angels seem to shudder in their eternal poses of grace and judgment. The church was designed to hold 300 people, built for grand ceremonies where important families gathered to mark life's sacred passages. Today it held exactly 2, Deborah and Father Reynolds, who kept glancing at his watch as though hoping someone, anyone, might still arrive to justify his presence. The pews stretched behind her like silent accusers, their emptiness more damning than any crowd. She'd sent the messages herself, personally texted every member of the Betts family 3 days ago. Her mother-in-law Victoria had responded with clinical efficiency, noted. Nicholas's sister Camilla sent back a single sad face emoji, nothing more. His brother Marcus hadn't bothered responding at all. Her husband had read the message and left her on scene. Those 2 blue check marks stabbed her heart with their silent dismissal, twisting deeper with every hour that passed. She'd told herself lies because the truth was too devastating. They were busy. The holiday season complicated schedules. Surely Nicholas would find a way to slip away from whatever commitments held him. Surely he wouldn't abandon her during the darkest moment of her life. But Patricia had died in a hospice room at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, Deborah holding her frail hand through those final gasping breaths, whispering promises about heaven and peace while her heart shattered into fragments she wasn't sure could ever be reassembled. In those last moments, her mother had squeezed her hand with surprising strength and whispered, "You deserve so much more than what you've accepted, baby girl. Promise me you'll remember your worth." Deborah had promised, not understanding then what prophecy those words contained. The smell of lilies overwhelmed everything, funeral flowers that arrived this morning from a generic service, not personally chosen, not lovingly arranged. Deborah had paid for them herself, just like she'd paid for the coffin, the burial plot, the service, the modest reception she'd planned that no one would attend. The Betts family didn't know she'd also quietly paid for their company's last 3 expansions, but that truth was buried deeper than her mother would soon be. Father Reynolds cleared his throat gently, his weathered face creased with sympathy that felt uncomfortably close to pity. "Mrs. Betts, we can postpone if you'd like. Perhaps when more people can attend." "No." Her voice emerged stronger than she felt, cutting through the cathedral's cold air like a blade. "My mother deserves to be laid to rest with dignity, whether an audience shows up to witness it or not." He nodded, understanding something in her tone that transcended logistics and scheduling. "Shall we begin, then?" Before she could answer, her phone vibrated against her ribs. Hope flared stupidly, desperately in her chest. Maybe Nicholas. Maybe an explanation. Maybe proof that she wasn't as abandoned as these empty pews suggested. She pulled out the phone with shaking hands, unlocked the screen, and opened the Betts family group chat, the one where Victoria shared society event photos, where Camilla posted vacation announcements, where Deborah existed mostly as a silent observer of their glittering, perfect lives. The newest message was a video from Nicholas, posted 7 minutes ago. Her finger hovered over the play button. Some primal instinct warned her that what she was about to witness would change everything, that certain knowledge couldn't be unknown once seen. She pressed play anyway, because hope dies slowly and love dies even slower. The video exploded with light and laughter, crystal chandeliers cascading golden illumination across the Harrington Christmas Gala. The ballroom of the Betts family estate sprawled in magazine-perfect glory. Women in designer gowns floated past champagne towers that sparkled like frozen fountains. Men in custom tuxedos raised glasses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Then Nicholas appeared on screen, devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, his arm draped around Camilla's shoulders. Both flushed with champagne and Christmas joy. He raised his glass toward the camera, his smile wide and genuine in a way he hadn't smiled at Deborah in months, maybe years. To family, his voice rang out, clear and jubilant. The only thing that truly matters. The camera panned, catching Victoria in her element, draped in diamonds that caught the light like captured stars, holding court among her society friends. She blew a kiss toward the screen. Someone off-camera yelled, "Best party of the decade." Marcus appeared next, dancing badly but enthusiastically, his wife laughing at his terrible rhythm. The entire Betts family was there, every single person, celebrating together in warmth and luxury and joy. While Deborah stood alone beside her mother's coffin in a freezing empty church. Nicholas's caption appeared beneath the video, "Family first. Always and forever." Victoria had already commented, 3 champagne emojis and a heart. Camilla added, "Best night ever. Love you all so much." Marcus's contribution was simpler, the Betts legacy continues strong. Deborah stared at the screen until the image blurred, her eyes burning but refusing to produce tears because tears felt too small, too inadequate for the volcanic eruption building inside her chest. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't a scheduling conflict or a miscommunication or a well-intentioned mistake that could be forgiven. Nicholas had chosen to be there. Chosen champagne over her tears. Chosen celebration over her grief. Chosen his family's Christmas party over the woman who'd loved him enough to reshape her entire existence around his comfort. She remembered this morning, how he'd kissed her forehead before leaving for what he claimed was an urgent situation requiring immediate handling. "I'll be there as soon as I can, baby. I promise. Just have to handle one critical thing first." She'd believed him. After 5 years of marriage, she trained herself to believe him, to convince herself that his absences were necessary, his priorities reasonable, his love genuine even when his actions screamed otherwise. Her mother's voice echoed through memory, sharp and clear, "You deserve so much more than what you've accepted." Father Reynolds touched her elbow softly. "Are you all right, my dear?" Deborah looked down at her mother's peaceful face, at the woman who'd cleaned other people's homes so her daughter could attend quality schools, who'd worked herself to exhaustion so Deborah could have opportunities she'd been denied, who'd never asked for anything except that her daughter find genuine happiness and authentic love. Patricia had questioned the marriage from the beginning, gently suggesting that Nicholas seemed more interested in how Deborah made him feel about himself than in who she actually was as a person. Deborah had dismissed those concerns as maternal overprotection, as her mother not understanding the complexities of their sophisticated relationship. Now, standing here utterly alone while her husband drank champagne and declared family the only thing that mattered, she understood. Her mother had seen clearly what she'd refused to acknowledge. "I'm fine, Father. Better than fine, actually." Her voice emerged steady, cold, crystalline with sudden clarity. "I'm finally seeing the truth." She opened the family group chat again, her fingers surprisingly steady as they moved across the screen. The Betts family was still posting comments on Nicholas's video, still celebrating their perfect evening together, still existing in their bubble of privilege and self-congratulation. They had no idea what was about to happen. No comprehension that the foundation supporting their entire existence was about to be systematically removed, piece by careful piece, until everything they took for granted came crashing down around them in spectacular ruin. Deborah typed 3 words. Short. Simple. Devastating. Withdraw everything. Effective immediately. She hit send and watched the message appear in the chat, sitting there innocent and cryptic among the champagne emojis and celebration photos. To them, it would mean nothing. Random words from the wife they barely tolerated, the woman they'd never bothered to truly see or understand. But across the city, in boardrooms and banks and offices that managed wealth they didn't comprehend, those 3 words would trigger automated protocols and contractual consequences they couldn't begin to imagine. Her phone lit up immediately. 3 dots appeared under her message. Someone was typing. The dots vanished, then reappeared, then vanished again. Nicholas had noticed. He was trying to formulate a response, probably confused, maybe irritated that she'd interrupted their celebration with her cryptic message. Let him wonder. Let them all wonder. Deborah slipped the phone back into her coat pocket and returned her full attention to her mother's coffin, to the woman who deserved every bit of dignity and love Deborah could provide, even if she had to provide it completely alone. We can begin now, Father. Her voice didn't waver. Just you, me, and my mother. That's more than enough. What the Betts family didn't know, what Nicholas had never bothered to discover, was that the woman standing alone in that cathedral wasn't the fragile, dependent wife they dismissed for 5 years. She was something far more dangerous. She was the architect of everything they owned. The world believed Nicholas Betts was the powerhouse, the visionary, the financial genius whose Midas touch transformed struggling ventures into gold. The world was wrong. Deborah Betts, quiet, graceful, systematically underestimated, was the actual architect of the fortune Nicholas wore like a crown. Long before Nicholas entered her life with his charming smile and practiced words, Deborah had built something remarkable. Something invisible. Something powerful. She was 23 when she founded her first company, a medical technology firm specializing in diagnostic equipment for underserved communities. Her mother had cleaned hospital floors for 15 years, watching wealthy patients receive cutting-edge care while poor families made do with outdated machines. Deborah vowed to change that. The company launched quietly under a holding group called Greenfield Innovations. No press releases. No celebrity investors. Just solid technology, ethical practices, and relentless execution. Within 3 years, it was generating $47 million in annual revenue. But Deborah's name appeared nowhere on the paperwork. Power doesn't need to announce itself to be real, Patricia had told her daughter over countless evening meals in their modest apartment. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most dangerous. Remember that, baby girl. Silence can be a weapon. Those words became Deborah's philosophy. By the time she met Nicholas at a charity gala, one she'd funded anonymously, Deborah's empire had expanded into 4 sectors: medical technology, green energy solutions, luxury retail, and digital finance platforms. Her holding companies were layered like Russian nesting dolls, each one legitimate, each one profitable, each one completely disconnected from her public identity. She was worth $340 million. And nobody knew. When Nicholas pursued her with the intensity of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, Deborah made a calculated choice. She presented herself as comfortable but not wealthy, a woman with good taste and modest means, someone who appreciated Nicholas's world without threatening his position in it. The Betts family embraced her cautiously. Victoria, the matriarch, assessed Deborah with the cold precision of an appraiser evaluating a potential acquisition. Camilla and Marcus treated her with polite distance, the way one might acknowledge pleasant but unremarkable furniture. Nicholas, however, saw something he wanted. A beautiful woman who made him feel powerful, who listened to his plans with genuine interest, who seemed content to orbit his brilliance rather than compete with it. He had no idea she was studying him. 6 months into their marriage, Betts Global faced its first crisis. A major investor pulled out unexpectedly, leaving a $22 million gap that threatened to collapse a crucial expansion into European markets. Nicholas spent 72 hours in emergency meetings, his usual confidence cracking at the edges. Deborah watched him unravel. Watched his family panic. Watched the carefully constructed facade of Bet's invincibility begin to crumble. Then she made a phone call. 48 hours later, a venture capital firm called Meridian Holdings, one of Deborah's discreetly managed entities, stepped in with a strategic investment. $25 million, structured as a standard business deal with favorable but not suspicious terms. Bet's Global was saved. Nicholas celebrated like he'd personally pulled off a miracle. His family toasted his incredible networking and unshakable business instinct. Victoria patted his cheek and declared him a true Bet's man. Nobody thanked Deborah because nobody knew. The second crisis came 18 months later. A supplier lawsuit threatened to expose questionable practices in Bet's Global's manufacturing division, practices Nicholas's brother Marcus had implemented without proper oversight. The settlement would cost $14 million and potentially destroy the company's reputation. Deborah's legal team, officially representing an unrelated holding company, negotiated a confidential settlement, restructured the contracts, and eliminated the threat before it became public. Again, Nicholas took credit for handling the situation decisively. The third crisis was the most dangerous. Bet's Global had overextended into a luxury hotel acquisition that was hemorrhaging money. The property was magnificent but poorly managed, and the debt service was drowning the company. Nicholas had championed the purchase against his advisor's warnings, driven by ego more than strategy. Bankruptcy wasn't just possible. It was imminent. Deborah spent 3 months quietly restructuring the disaster. She used her luxury retail connections to bring in high-end brands for the hotel boutiques. Her green energy companies installed cost-saving solar systems. Her digital finance platforms created exclusive membership programs that transformed the property from a debt anchor into a profit center. The hotel became Bet's Global's crown jewel. Nicholas gave interviews about his visionary leadership and innovative approach to hospitality. Meanwhile, Deborah funded Marcus's failed tech startup, $4.7 million that vanished into poorly executed product launches. She quietly paid off Camilla's gambling debts, $1.2 million accrued at private clubs where the Bet's name granted unlimited credit. She even covered Victoria's investments in a fraudulent art scheme, $3.8 million lost to a con artist who targeted wealthy socialites. The family never knew. They simply assumed their problems resolved themselves, the way problems do when you're wealthy and important and protected by an invisible safety net you don't realize exists. Deborah kept her wealth hidden for 2 reasons. First, the Betts family worshipped appearances. They valued image over substance, performance over authenticity. If they discovered Deborah's true worth, she would transform from Nicholas's wife into a resource to be exploited. Every family crisis would become her responsibility. Every failed venture would require her funding. She'd become a bank, not a person. Second, and more painfully, she wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she could provide. She wanted Nicholas to choose her on difficult days, to prioritize her during painful moments, to show up when appearances didn't matter and cameras weren't watching. She wanted to be valued as Deborah, not as a solution to someone else's problems. But as the years passed, the contrast between Nicholas's public charm and private negligence became impossible to ignore. He was magnificent at glamorous events, attentive, affectionate, the perfect husband performing for an audience. He'd rest his hand on her lower back, lean in to whisper comments that made her laugh, introduce her to important people with genuine pride in his voice. But at home, in private moments when no one was watching, he was someone else entirely. Dinners canceled for urgent meetings that turned out to be golf outings with clients. Anniversaries forgotten because work has been absolutely insane, baby, you understand. Conversations interrupted by phone calls he'd taken in another room, his voice dropping to intimate tones that made Deborah's stomach clench with suspicion she tried desperately to ignore. The urgent work trips that lasted 3 days longer than originally planned. The hotel charges on credit card statements for cities he claimed he wasn't visiting. The perfume scent on his jacket collar that wasn't hers. She told herself stories to survive. He's under pressure. Building a company is demanding. Marriage requires patience. Love means understanding. Patricia's voice would echo through those rationalizations. Baby girl, understanding is different from accepting disrespect. Don't confuse the two. Now, standing in the cathedral with her mother's body growing cold and Nicholas's celebration video playing on loop in her mind, Deborah finally understood what her mother had been trying to tell her. The Betts dynasty, the wealth, the reputation, the social standing, the business empire, the luxury lifestyle, the perfect image, existed only because Deborah had built it, funded it, protected it, and sustained it. She was the foundation beneath their feet. She was the invisible infrastructure supporting their visible success. She was the silent architect of everything Nicholas claimed credit for creating. And they had repaid her sacrifice by leaving her alone at her mother's funeral, by mocking her grief with champagne and laughter, by treating her pain as an inconvenience that interrupted their celebration. Deborah's phone buzzed again in her pocket. The family chat was exploding with confused messages now, questions about her cryptic text, demands for explanation. She didn't look at it. Instead, she placed both hands on her mother's coffin and made a promise in the flickering candlelight. You were right, Mama. About everything. About him, about them, about what I deserve. I'm done being invisible. I'm done protecting people who wouldn't cross the street to comfort me. I'm done building empires for people who can't even show up. Her voice dropped to a whisper that echoed through the empty cathedral like a vow. They're about to learn who really holds the power in this family. And it was never Nicholas. Father Reynolds returned from the vestry, ready to begin the service. Deborah straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and prepared to bury the woman who taught her that true strength doesn't need an audience. The Betts family would soon discover that lesson themselves. When Deborah withdrew her support, they wouldn't just lose money. They would lose everything. The funeral ended with practiced efficiency. Father Reynolds spoke beautiful words about eternal rest and heavenly peace, his voice echoing through emptiness that made every syllable feel heavier than it should. Deborah stood motionless through all of it, her grief now wrapped in something harder, colder, something that felt dangerously close to clarity. As the coffin was lowered into frozen ground, she pulled out her phone again. Not to check the exploding family chat. Not to see their confusion and questions about her cryptic message. She opened her text thread with Nicholas instead. The messages told a story of systematic abandonment so brutal it actually took her breath away to see it laid out in chronological order. Deborah, Mom's gone. She died an hour ago. I'm still at the hospice. I don't know what to do. Please call me. Read at 11:51 p.m. No response. Deborah, the funeral is Saturday at St. Catherine's. 2 p.m. Can you please be there? I need you. Read at 6:45 a.m. No response. Deborah, Nicholas, please answer me. I'm making arrangements alone and I'm falling apart. Just tell me you'll be there. Read at 2:19 p.m. No response. Deborah, I sent the funeral details to your family. Your mother hasn't responded. Neither has Camilla or Marcus. Please tell them this matters. Read at 9:08 a.m. No response. Deborah, tomorrow is the funeral. I know you're busy with the gala preparation, but this is my mother. Please. I'm begging you. Just show up. Read at 7:35 p.m. Then finally, at 7:41 p.m., Nicholas had responded. Baby, you know how important this gala is for the family. I'll make it up to you. Promise. Deborah remembered collapsing on their bedroom floor when she'd read that message, her body shaking with sobs that felt like they might tear her apart from the inside. She'd told herself he didn't understand. Couldn't comprehend what he was asking. Didn't realize the magnitude of his choice. But he'd understood perfectly. He just hadn't cared. The texts with his sister were worse. Camilla, I really need your support tomorrow. Mom died and I'm completely alone in this. Please consider coming, even for just an hour. Camilla's response came 6 hours later. Deborah, I'm sorry about your mom, but we're not pausing Christmas celebrations for a funeral. That's just not realistic. The gala has been planned for months. Surely you understand. Deborah had stared at that shrugging emoji for 20 minutes straight, trying to comprehend how someone could be that casually cruel. How 5 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings and forced politeness could matter so little that her grief rated a shoulder shrug and a suggestion that she be more realistic. She'd screenshotted the message. Not sure why at the time. Some instinct told her she'd need evidence later that this coldness was real, that she hadn't imagined or exaggerated their indifference. Nicholas's response to that same request was somehow worse in its brevity. Your sister said the family won't come. Can you please talk to them? This is the most important day of my life, and I'm facing it completely alone. Babe, you're being dramatic. It's just a funeral. People die. We'll do something nice for her memory after the holidays. A laughing emoji. Her husband had responded to her mother's death and her desperate plea for support with a laughing emoji. Deborah's hands trembled as she scrolled through the evidence of her own willful blindness. Because these weren't isolated incidents. They were the pattern she'd been ignoring for 5 years, the red flags she'd rationalized away because acknowledging them would mean confronting truths she wasn't ready to face. The memories flooded back with devastating clarity. 3 years ago, Deborah's medical technology company had won the International Innovation Award, a prestigious recognition that came with a prime-time ceremony and major media coverage. She'd invited Nicholas weeks in advance, marked it on their shared calendar, reminded him 3 separate times. The night of the ceremony, she'd sat in the audience wearing the emerald dress she'd purchased specifically for this moment, watching the empty seat beside her while Nicholas attended his cousin's birthday party. Family comes first, baby. You understand. This award isn't going anywhere, you can celebrate it any time. She'd accepted her award alone, smiled for photos alone, returned to their empty penthouse and cried alone while Nicholas posted Instagram stories of himself singing karaoke with his cousins, his arm around Camilla's shoulders, both of them laughing into the camera. 2 years ago, Patricia had been admitted to the hospital with what turned out to be the first major health scare that would eventually lead to her diagnosis. Deborah had texted Nicholas from the emergency room at 3 a.m., terrified and exhausted. He'd arrived at noon the next day, stayed for 17 minutes, spent most of that time on his phone handling urgent business, then left because Victoria needed him to review contract details for a property acquisition. Patricia had squeezed Deborah's hand after he'd gone and said quietly, "A man who can't show up for your emergencies will never show up for your life." Deborah had defended him, made excuses about business pressures and family obligations and the complexity of balancing multiple responsibilities. 18 months ago, Victoria had hosted a charity luncheon at the Betts estate, one of her elaborate social performances where wealthy women gathered to write checks and compete over who appeared most philanthropic. Deborah had been arranging flowers in the main hall when she'd overheard Victoria talking to her bridge club friends in the adjacent parlor. "Oh, Patricia?" Deborah's mother. Victoria's voice had dripped with practiced disdain. "Lovely woman, I'm sure, but completely lacking in refinement. You can take the woman out of the cleaning service, but you can't teach class. Not real class. It's genetic, I believe. Some people simply aren't bred for elevated society." The women had laughed, polite, knowing laughter that suggested they agreed completely. Deborah had stood frozen behind the flower arrangement, her hands buried in roses and baby's breath, listening to her mother being casually dismissed as genetically inferior by people who wouldn't survive a single week of the life Patricia had lived. She'd said nothing, done nothing, just finished the flowers and smiled through the luncheon and pretended she hadn't heard. Patricia had asked her later why she seemed sad. Deborah had lied and said she was fine, protecting Nicholas's family even then, even when they didn't deserve her silence or her grace. The pattern was undeniable now. Nicholas consistently chose his family's trivial events over Deborah's significant moments. Victoria openly mocked the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give Deborah opportunities. Camilla treated Deborah's grief like an inconvenient scheduling conflict. Marcus simply ignored her existence unless he needed something. And Deborah had accepted it all. Rationalized it. Convinced herself that marriage meant compromise, that love required patience, that being part of a family sometimes meant swallowing your pride and your pain. Her phone buzzed. A new message, this one from her private investigator, a man named Thomas Chun who'd been monitoring certain situations at Deborah's request for the past 6 months. She'd hired him after finding hotel receipts that didn't match Nicholas's claimed travel schedule. After noticing charges for jewelry she'd never received. After her instincts finally overpowered her desperate need to believe in her marriage. Thomas's message was brief and devastating. Alert! Nicholas attempted to access your Greenfield Holdings accounts at 9:47 a.m. today. Tried 3 different password combinations. All failed. He also met with Harrison and Cole divorce attorneys yesterday afternoon. Meeting lasted 73 minutes. Want me to dig deeper? Deborah read the message 3 times, each word landing like a physical blow. Nicholas was trying to access her hidden accounts, the ones he didn't know existed, the ones that funded everything he claimed to have built himself. Which meant he suspected she had money. Which meant he was searching for it. Which meant he was preparing to take it. And he'd met with divorce attorneys. While her mother was dying. While Deborah was making funeral arrangements and begging him to show basic human decency. While she was texting him desperate pleas for support. He'd been sitting in a law office planning his exit strategy. She typed back to Thomas with steady fingers. Yes. Get everything. Financial planning, asset searches, communication records. And find out who recommended those specific attorneys. His response came immediately. Already on it. Initial findings suggest he's been planning this for approximately 4 months. There's more. Call when you're ready. 4 months. 1/3 of the time her mother had been in hospice care. 1/3 of the period when Deborah had been watching Patricia slowly slip away, when she'd needed Nicholas most, when she'd convinced herself his distance was about work stress and not something far more calculated. He'd been preparing to leave her. Probably preparing to take as much as he could in the process, to claim credit for wealth he'd never earned, to paint himself as the victim of a failed marriage while positioning himself for maximum financial benefit. The realization settled over Deborah like ice water, clarifying, shocking, undeniable. This wasn't about the funeral. The funeral was just the moment when his mask finally slipped completely, when the performance became impossible to maintain, when his priorities revealed themselves with brutal honesty. Nicholas had checked out of their marriage months ago. Maybe longer. Maybe, and this thought made her stomach clench, maybe he'd never really been present at all. Maybe she'd been so busy building the life he claimed to provide that she'd never noticed he was only playing a role, performing the part of devoted husband for an audience that included his family, their social circle, and most devastatingly, Deborah herself. Father Reynolds approached quietly. Mrs. Betts, the groundskeepers need to complete their work. Would you like a few more minutes? Deborah looked down at the fresh earth covering her mother's coffin. Patricia Green, who'd worked herself to exhaustion so her daughter could have better. Who'd cleaned other people's homes so Deborah could attend good schools. Who'd sacrificed her own comfort and health and dreams so her child might escape poverty's grip. And in return, Deborah had married a man who left her alone at her mother's funeral. Who laughed at her grief. Whose family mocked Patricia's lack of class, while living off money Deborah had quietly provided. No, Father. I'm finished here. She straightened her shoulders, feeling something click into place inside her chest, something hard and clear and utterly unbreakable. Thank you for everything. She walked to her car, a modest sedan she drove despite being able to afford any vehicle she wanted. Another choice made to maintain the illusion Nicholas required, the pretense that he was the provider, the successful one, the powerful partner in their relationship. Inside the car, she opened her phone and pulled up the files Thomas had been compiling. Bank records showing Nicholas's spending patterns, $47,000 at jewelry stores in cities where he claimed to be attending business conferences. Hotel suites booked under his name with checkout times suggesting he hadn't been alone. Restaurant charges for expensive dinners at times when he texted her saying he was in meetings and would grab something quick. The evidence of betrayal was comprehensive and damning. But what struck her most wasn't the probable affair or the financial deception or even the divorce planning. It was the timing. He'd started all of this, the secret meetings, the suspicious purchases, the attorney consultations, right around the time Patricia's diagnosis became terminal. Right when Deborah was most vulnerable, most dependent on emotional support, most in need of the partnership she thought marriage promised. He'd seen her grief as opportunity. Her weakness as tactical advantage. Her love as something to exploit rather than honor. The funeral hadn't broken her. The truth did. But breaking and shattering are different things. Glass breaks into useless fragments. Steel breaks into blades. Deborah started the engine and pulled away from the cemetery, leaving behind the woman who taught her that silence could be a weapon and dignity didn't require an audience. The Betts family was still celebrating at their gala, still drinking champagne and posting videos, still completely unaware that the foundation of their entire world had just been systematically removed. They'd find out soon enough. And when they did, Deborah would be watching from a position they'd never anticipated and couldn't comprehend. Not as the abandoned wife, not as the grieving daughter, not as the invisible woman they'd systematically underestimated, but as the architect of their destruction. One carefully placed blade at a time. The message Deborah sent, those 3 simple words, traveled through encrypted channels at the speed of light, triggering protocols she'd spent years carefully constructing for a day she'd hoped would never come. Withdraw everything. Effective immediately. In server rooms scattered across 3 continents, automated systems recognized her unique authentication signature embedded in the message metadata. No passwords required. No secondary confirmations needed. Just those 3 words from her verified device, and the machinery of financial destruction began its methodical work. Father Reynolds opened his worn Bible, his voice gentle as he began reading Psalm 23. The words echoed through the empty cathedral, meant to comfort but somehow emphasizing the absence of everyone who should have been there to hear them. Deborah sat in the front pew, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight, her face composed. To anyone watching, she appeared to be a grieving daughter maintaining dignity through unbearable loss. No one could see the storm she'd just unleashed. Nicholas raised his champagne glass for the 4th toast of the evening, his smile wide and practiced, his tuxedo perfect, his hair artfully styled. 200 of the city's elite surrounded him. Old money and new wealth, society darlings and ambitious climbers, all gathered to celebrate another year of Betts' family dominance. To tradition, he announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom. To family. To the legacy we continue to build together. Crystal clinked against crystal. Laughter rippled through designer gowns and custom suits. Someone's phone captured the moment for social media, already composing captions about elegance and excellence. Nicholas's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Probably Deborah, probably still upset about the funeral timing, probably needing reassurance he'd provide later when the party wound down and he could afford to be generous with his attention. The phone buzzed again. Then continuously, like something was desperately trying to break through. At Silverton Capital Management, where Meridian Holdings maintained its primary investment accounts, automated withdrawal protocols activated. The system didn't hesitate or question. It simply executed. $127 million in liquid assets began transferring to designated receiving accounts, offshore structures Deborah had established years ago, legitimate entities registered in her maiden name that existed completely outside the Betts family's knowledge or reach. The transfers took 90 seconds. Marcus Betts's emergency line of credit, the one he'd used to cover his failed tech startup's payroll for the past 8 months, received automated notification of immediate recall. Outstanding balance, $4.7 million. Payment due, immediately. The system didn't care that it was Saturday. Didn't care about Christmas celebrations or family gatherings. It simply noted that the guarantor had withdrawn authorization, and therefore the credit facility no longer existed. Greenfield Property Holdings received Deborah's authentication code and immediately activated liquidation procedures for the Chelsea townhouse, the one Victoria used for her cultural trips to London, the one that cost $43,000 monthly in maintenance alone, the one Deborah had purchased through a subsidiary and allowed the family to use rent-free for 3 years. Listing notifications went out to premier real estate agents. The property would hit the market Monday morning with aggressive pricing to ensure rapid sale. Current occupants, Victoria and her bridge club friends, there for a weekend shopping expedition, would receive eviction notices within 72 hours. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, Father Reynolds read, his voice steady and sure, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Deborah's eyes remained fixed on her mother's coffin, but her mind tracked the digital devastation unfolding across multiple time zones. She'd built the system to be thorough, To be unstoppable once initiated, to remove every safety net simultaneously so there'd be no time to recover or regroup. She'd built it to be merciless. Because mercy required showing up. Mercy required basic human decency. Mercy required caring enough to send a single text message of condolence or solidarity or love. The Betts family had shown her exactly how much mercy they possessed. Now she was returning the favor. The Betts' global hotel property, the crown jewel Nicholas loved to showcase in interviews, the one he claimed demonstrated his visionary leadership, received automated notifications from 14 different vendors. The solar panel company Deborah's green energy subsidiary had installed at cost. Contract terminated. Equipment rental fees now applied retroactively. Balance due, $890,000. The luxury retail brands occupying the boutique spaces, lease agreements void due to guarantor withdrawal. 30-day eviction proceedings initiated. The exclusive membership platform that had transformed the hotel from money pit to profit center, service discontinued immediately. Member refunds processed from hotel operating accounts. The hotel's general manager stared at her computer screen in confusion as system after system simply stopped working. The boutiques went dark. The membership portal crashed. The energy bill suddenly reflected standard utility rates instead of the subsidized costs they'd enjoyed for 2 years. Within 6 minutes, the hotel's operational costs had increased by 340% while its revenue streams evaporated. Nicholas's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He excused himself from a conversation with the mayor and stepped into the private study off the main ballroom, closing the heavy oak door behind him. 17 missed calls. 43 text messages. Emergency alerts from banks he didn't even remember having accounts with. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the first notification. Silverton Capital, urgent, primary investment account closure in progress. Contact immediately. That made no sense. Silverton managed his main operating capital. You couldn't just close those accounts. There were protocols, paperwork, approval processes. The next message was worse. Meridian Holdings, withdrawal authorization confirmed. All positions liquidated. Transfer complete. Nicholas felt his stomach drop. Meridian was, he tried to remember, some investment firm that had rescued them during the European expansion crisis. But why would they be messaging him about withdrawals? His phone rang. Marcus. He answered immediately. Nicholas, what the hell is happening? Marcus's voice was panicked, stripped of its usual arrogant confidence. I just got a call from my bank saying my entire credit line is being recalled. $4.7 million due immediately. They said the guarantor canceled. What guarantor? I don't have a guarantor. I don't know. I'm getting alerts too. Let me call. The phone buzzed with an incoming call. The hotel general manager. Nicholas put Marcus on hold and switched over. Mr. Betts, I don't know how to explain this, but everything is falling apart. The solar company is demanding payment, the boutiques are dark, the membership system crashed, and I have vendors threatening to sue. It's like someone pulled the plug on everything at once. What do you want me to? Another call. His private banker. Nicholas's heart hammered against his ribs. He switched lines again. Mr. Betts, we need to speak immediately. There have been massive unauthorized withdrawals from accounts connected to your business entities. I'm looking at liquidations totaling over $100 million in the past 5 minutes. Someone with high-level access has initiated. Nicholas's champagne glass slipped from his other hand, shattering against the antique Persian rug. Crystal fragments scattered like tiny diamonds, champagne soaking into silk fibers that cost more than most people's cars. $100 million. In 5 minutes. This wasn't a glitch. This was deliberate. This was coordinated. This was. His mind raced through possibilities. Cyber attack? Impossible. These were separate institutions with different security protocols. Embezzlement? His CFO was at the party, dancing badly with his wife. Banking error? Not across multiple countries simultaneously. Then he remembered. Deborah's message in the family chat. The one he'd barely noticed while toasting and celebrating and performing for their guests. Withdraw everything. Effective immediately. No. That was ridiculous. Deborah didn't have access to business accounts. Deborah didn't control investment portfolios. Deborah was she was his wife. Comfortable but not wealthy. Supportive but not powerful. Present but not essential. Except Meridian Holdings had appeared exactly when they'd needed it most, with perfect timing and favorable terms. Except the hotel's transformation had involved resources and connections that had seemed almost miraculous. Except every crisis that threatened to destroy them had somehow resolved itself right when disaster seemed inevitable. His phone buzzed again. Victoria. Then Camilla. Then 3 board members. Then his attorney. Everyone calling at once, everyone panicking, everyone demanding he fix whatever catastrophe was systematically dismantling everything they'd built. Everything he'd thought he'd built. Nicholas's legs felt weak. He sat down heavily in the leather chair behind the desk, his perfect hair falling across his forehead, his perfect smile completely gone, his perfect evening dissolving into nightmare confusion. Father Reynolds finished the service with a prayer for peace and eternal rest. His voice carried genuine warmth as he spoke about Patricia's strength, her sacrifices, her love for her daughter. Deborah stood and approached the coffin one final time. She placed both hands on the polished wood, feeling its cool surface beneath her palms. Around the world, automated systems continued their work. Bank accounts draining. Credit lines collapsing. Property holdings transferring. Vendor relationships severing. Investment positions liquidating. Every financial thread she'd woven into the Betts family tapestry was being systematically pulled, and the entire structure was unraveling at catastrophic speed. She thought about Nicholas at his party, surrounded by his family and their society friends, probably just now beginning to understand that something had gone terribly, irrevocably wrong. Probably still assuming it was fixable. Probably already formulating explanations and strategies and plans to regain control. He had no idea there was no control to regain. No explanations that would matter. No strategies that could rebuild what she'd spent 5 years constructing and 5 minutes destroying. Deborah leaned close to the coffin and whispered words meant only for her mother's spirit. "I kept my promise, Mama. I'm remembering my worth." She straightened, nodded to Father Reynolds, and walked down the cathedral aisle with her head high and her shoulders back. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting her in colors that looked like fire and redemption. Behind her, Patricia Green lay at rest, her sacrifices honored, her daughter finally free. Ahead, the Betts family's perfect world was collapsing in real time, every champagne toast turning to ash, every celebration transforming into crisis. And Deborah, quiet, graceful, systematically underestimated, walked into the December afternoon knowing she'd become exactly what her mother had always believed she could be. Not a woman defined by who loved her, but a woman defined by her own unshakable worth. The funeral was over. The reckoning had just begun. The crystal champagne flutes had been abandoned. The orchestra still played in the ballroom, but the Betts family had retreated to the study like wounded animals seeking shelter. The heavy oak door closed out the party sounds, leaving only the harsh breathing of people watching their world implode in real time. 127 million. Marcus's voice cracked as he read from his phone. Gone. Just gone. How is that even possible? Victoria stood by the window, her diamond necklace catching the light like ice. Her carefully maintained composure had fractured, revealing something raw and vicious underneath. Nicholas. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. Explain. Now. Nicholas scrolled frantically through alerts, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his bow tie hanging loose, his perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. I'm trying to understand. Multiple accounts, different institutions, all withdrawing simultaneously. The hotel contracts are being terminated. The London property is listed for sale. It's like... Like what? Camilla interrupted, her designer gown suddenly looking too theatrical, too frivolous for the crisis unfolding. Like someone who actually controlled everything just took it back? Is that what you're trying to say? That's impossible, Nicholas said, but his voice lacked conviction. Deborah doesn't have that kind of access. She's never been involved in. Deborah. Victoria's voice dripped with venom. She turned from the window, her face twisted with realization and rage. That woman. That cleaning lady's daughter somehow had access to our family's financial infrastructure. She's my wife, Nicholas said weakly, already sensing how that defense would land. She's the reason we're ruined. Victoria shrieked, her cultured accent slipping to reveal something sharper underneath. You married a nobody, gave her access to God knows what, and now she's destroyed us. You incompetent, arrogant fool. Marcus slammed his fist against the desk. My credit line is being recalled. 4.7 million, Nicholas. Due immediately. Where am I supposed to find that kind of cash? You told me that funding was secure. You promised me. I didn't know there was a guarantor. Nicholas's composure cracked completely. I assumed it was standard business financing. I didn't realize someone was backing it personally. You didn't realize. Camilla's laugh was bitter. That's your defense? You didn't realize? Jesus, Nicholas, you've been strutting around like some financial genius for 5 years, and you didn't even know who was actually funding everything. Victoria crossed the room in 3 sharp strides and stood directly in front of her son, her face inches from his. You have ruined this family. Everything your grandfather built. Everything your father protected. Everything I sacrificed to maintain. You married some pretty face with a tragic backstory and gave her access to destroy us. I didn't give her anything. Nicholas shouted back, his own anger finally surfacing. I don't even know what she had access to. This doesn't make sense. Then make it make sense. Victoria's voice rose to a shriek. Call her. Threaten her. Fix this before Monday morning when everyone in our social circle realizes we're bankrupt. Nicholas grabbed his phone with shaking hands and dialed Deborah's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. Her voice, calm, professional, distant, invited him to leave a message. He hung up and dialed again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. She's not answering, he said, his voice hollow. Of course she's not answering. Marcus threw his phone across the room. It hit the wall and shattered. She just stole everything from us. Why would she answer? We need lawyers, Camilla said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Criminal lawyers. We need to prosecute her for theft, for fraud, for what? A new voice entered the conversation. Harrison Cole, the divorce attorney Nicholas had consulted just yesterday, stood in the doorway. His presence was like cold water on an already freezing situation. For withdrawing her own money from her own accounts? For terminating business relationships she personally guaranteed? For liquidating assets she legally owns? Everyone turned to stare at him. Nicholas felt his blood run cold. What are you talking about? Those are family assets. Company holdings. Harrison stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. His expression was grave. Mr. Betts, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Did you know your wife has a personal net worth of approximately $340 million? The silence that followed was absolute. That's impossible, Nicholas finally whispered. Is it? Harrison pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through documents. Greenfield Innovations. Meridian Holdings. Aurora Property Group. Stellar Energy Solutions. Approximately 17 different entities, all registered under her maiden name, all established before your marriage. She's the sole owner and operator of a diversified portfolio that generates roughly $47 million annually. Victoria sat down heavily, her face ashen. You're saying Deborah has been wealthy this entire time? I'm saying Deborah is wealthy, Mrs. Betts. Present tense. And based on what I'm seeing in real-time financial reports, She's currently withdrawing every penny she ever invested in your family's enterprises. Nicholas's mind reeled backward, memories reshuffling themselves with this new devastating context. He'd spotted her across the ballroom, elegant in a simple black dress that somehow outshone every woman dripping in obvious designer labels. She'd been talking with a hospital administrator, discussing medical equipment donations with genuine knowledge that had surprised him. "Who is she?" he'd asked his mother. Victoria had assessed Deborah with clinical precision. Patricia Green's daughter. The cleaning woman who does the East Wing. The girl is educated, somehow, but she's nobody. Pretty though. Good bone structure. Nicholas had approached anyway, intrigued by her intelligence and attracted to how she seemed genuinely interested in his work rather than his money. She'd asked thoughtful questions about his business expansion plans, offered insights about healthcare infrastructure that had impressed him. Within 6 months, he'd proposed. He remembered his mother's warning, "She comes from nothing, Nicholas. Make sure she signs an ironclad prenup." And Deborah had signed without hesitation, without negotiation, without even reading the document carefully. He'd been relieved. It confirmed she loved him for who he was, not what he had. Now he understood. She'd signed easily because she had nothing to protect. Or so he'd thought. "I can't make it, baby. Family obligation. You understand." He'd gone to his cousin's birthday party instead, a mediocre celebration he genuinely enjoyed because it required nothing of him, no performance of being the supportive husband, no pretending interest in her little medical device company. He'd seen photos later, Deborah accepting her award alone, smiling for cameras alone, celebrating alone. He'd felt a twinge of guilt that he'd smoothed over with expensive flowers and a weekend trip to wine country. He'd overheard Victoria's comments about Patricia lacking class and breeding. He'd said nothing. Why would he? His mother was right. Patricia was lovely certainly, but she wasn't Bet's family material. She didn't understand their world. He'd never mentioned it to Deborah. Why upset her over something so trivial? The woman at the hotel bar had been beautiful, attentive, impressed by his success. The affair had started casually, a distraction, nothing serious, just something that made him feel powerful again, desired for who he was rather than what he provided. Except Deborah had never asked him for anything. Never demanded his money. Never leveraged his status. She'd been consistently supportive, unfailingly graceful, somehow always available when he actually needed her. But the marriage felt stale. Predictable. He'd started wondering what life might look like with someone new, someone who sparkled the way Deborah had when they'd first met. He'd consulted Harrison about divorce proceedings. About asset protection. About how to structure the separation to maximize his position. "The prenup is solid," Harrison had said. "She gets minimal support. You keep everything." Nicholas had felt satisfied with that arrangement. Fair, even. After all, he was the one who'd built the Betts empire. She'd just been along for the ride. "Mr. Betts." Harrison's voice cut through the memory spiral. "Are you listening? I said she's not stealing from you. She's withdrawing her own investments. Everything she's taking is legally hers. You have no recourse." "But the hotel," Nicholas said desperately. "The expansion. The London property. Those are ours." "No." Harrison's voice was flat. "According to property records, those assets are owned by Deborah's holding companies. You've been living in her properties, operating her investments, benefiting from her financial support for your entire marriage. And she let you believe you built it yourself." The words landed like physical blows. Victoria stood abruptly, her face twisted with humiliation and rage. "That conniving little," she planned this. "She married into this family to destroy us. To humiliate us. To what?" Harrison interrupted. "To save your business 3 separate times? To personally fund your son's expansion when legitimate investors withdrew? To quietly pay off gambling debts and failed ventures and fraudulent investment losses? Yes, Mrs. Betts. What a terrible revenge." Nicholas's phone buzzed. A message from Thomas Chun, Deborah's investigator, though Nicholas didn't know that. Just a number he didn't recognize with an attachment he shouldn't open but couldn't resist. The file contained screenshots. Text messages from Nicholas's phone to his attorney. Emails to the woman from the hotel, Rachel. Her name was Rachel. Planning documents outlining divorce strategy, asset division, custody arrangements for wealth he'd never actually controlled. And at the bottom, a note in Deborah's handwriting, photographed and included as evidence. These are the messages my husband sent while my mother was dying. While I begged him to show up for her funeral. While I was crying myself to sleep in an empty bed, he was planning to divorce me, take half of what he thought I had, and paint me as unstable and emotionally manipulative. He was going to destroy me. Instead, I'm freeing myself. There's a difference. Nicholas felt his legs give out. He sat down hard, the phone slipping from his hands. Nicholas. Camilla's voice seemed distant, muffled. What is it? What did you find? He couldn't speak. Couldn't explain that his wife, his quiet, supportive, systematically underestimated wife, had been documenting everything. Planning everything. Building a case so comprehensive and damning that his own attorney would be forced to acknowledge her legal superiority. Victoria grabbed the phone from where it had fallen. Her face went white as she scrolled through the messages. You were planning to divorce her while her mother was in hospice? I didn't. It wasn't. Nicholas couldn't form coherent sentences. Fix this. Victoria's voice was ice. I don't care how. Apologize. Beg. Grovel. Get her to restore what she took or we're finished. Do you understand? Finished. Nicholas dialed Deborah's number again with trembling fingers. Voicemail. He tried texting. Baby, please. We need to talk. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Please call me. I love you. The message showed delivered. Then read. Then nothing. He waited, staring at the screen, willing her to respond. Deborah looked at Nicholas's message, her expression neutral. She opened her phone settings and scrolled to emergency contacts. Nicholas's name sat at the top, listed as husband, primary contact. She tapped the name and selected delete. A confirmation dialog appeared, remove Nicholas Betts from emergency contacts. Her finger hovered over the screen for exactly 1 second. Then she pressed confirm. The name vanished. In its place, she added a single new entry, Thomas Chin, investigator. She set her phone down and continued driving, her mother's words echoing through her mind. You deserve so much more than what you've accepted, baby girl. Behind her, the Betts family tore itself apart trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Ahead of her, freedom waited. Deborah had driven straight to the modest 2-bedroom apartment she'd maintained throughout her marriage, a space Nicholas didn't even know existed, registered under her maiden name, paid for with money from accounts he'd never suspected she possessed. It was her sanctuary, decorated with her mother's photographs and the simple furniture Patricia had chosen when she'd still been healthy enough to help her daughter move in. She'd just changed out of her funeral dress when her phone rang for the 47th time. Nicholas. Again. She stared at the screen, watching his name flash insistently. Part of her wanted to let it ring through to voicemail like the previous 46 attempts. But another part, the part that had loved him once, that had built empires to protect his pride, that had believed in the fantasy of their marriage, knew this conversation needed to happen. She answered on the 8th ring. Deborah. Oh, thank God. Nicholas's voice flooded through the speaker, relief and desperation tangled together. Baby, I've been trying to reach you for hours. Where are you? Are you okay? The concern in his voice might have been genuine. Once, she would have accepted it without question. I'm fine. Her voice came out flat, emotionless, a stark contrast to his artificial warmth. I was so worried. You weren't answering, and with everything that's been happening today, he paused, recalibrating. Listen, sweetheart, I know you're upset about the funeral. I know I should have been there. You're absolutely right to be angry with me. Sweetheart. One of his favorite weapons. The pet name he deployed when he needed something, when he was performing the role of loving husband, when he was manipulating rather than connecting. Deborah said nothing. She'd learned years ago that silence made people reveal themselves faster than questions ever could. "Baby, are you there?" His voice shifted, trying for playful concern. "Don't give me the silent treatment. You know I hate that. Talk to me. My mother was buried today." Each word landed with precise weight. Patricia and Green. The woman who raised me. Who sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities she never had. Who worked herself to death cleaning homes for people like your family. I buried her today, Nicholas. At 2 o'clock. At St. Catherine's Cathedral. I know, and I'm so sorry I couldn't be there. The timing was. You chose a party. Her voice remained calm, clinical. While I stood alone beside my mother's coffin, you were drinking champagne. You were toasting family. You were posting videos about how family is the only thing that truly matters. And you were laughing, Nicholas. I saw you laughing. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. Deborah, listen. He'd abandoned the pet names now, his voice tightening with something that might have been genuine emotion if she still trusted anything about him. The gala was scheduled months ago. Important people were expecting us. I couldn't just cancel without. Without what? The ice in her voice could have frozen oceans. Without disappointing people who matter? Unlike your wife, who apparently doesn't. That's not fair. You're twisting this into something it wasn't. I was planning to come to the funeral after the gala. I told you that. But then all this insanity started happening with the accounts and the hotel and everything falling apart, and I've been trying to fix it, trying to understand what's going on. You were planning to come after? She laughed, a sound without humor. After you finished celebrating? After you'd had enough champagne and attention? Tell me, Nicholas, what time were you planning to arrive? 3? 4? Would there have been any funeral left to attend by then? Deborah, please. I made a mistake, okay? I made a terrible mistake. But we can fix this. We can, his voice cracked slightly. Whatever's happening with the finances, whatever system glitch is causing all these accounts to close, we need to stop it before Monday. My lawyers say. It's not a glitch. The words hung in the air like a blade. What? His voice went very quiet. It's not a system malfunction, Nicholas. It's not a cyber attack. It's not unauthorized access. It's me. I withdrew my investments. I terminated my support. I liquidated my assets. It's already done. She could hear his breathing change, shallow, rapid, the sound of someone's world reorganizing itself around impossible information. Your investments? He was trying to process, trying to make the pieces fit. Deborah, what are you talking about? What investments? Meridian Holdings. The 25 million that saved your European expansion when your investor pulled out. That was me. Greenfield Property Group. The London townhouse your mother uses rent-free, the one that's now listed for sale. That was me. Aurora Energy Solutions. The solar installations that transformed your hotel from a money pit into a profit center. That was me. Stellar Finance. The membership platform that generates 60% of your hotel's revenue. That was me. Each revelation landed like a separate blow. She could picture him, sitting wherever he was, his perfect hair disheveled, his perfect image crumbling, his perfect understanding of reality disintegrating sentence by sentence. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. You never said. You never asked. Her voice remained eerily calm. 5 years, Nicholas. 5 years of marriage, and you never once asked about my work. My companies. My success. You were so convinced you were the powerful one, the provider, the genius behind Bet's global success. You never considered that the woman standing beside you might be the actual foundation everything was built on. Deborah, if you have money, if you've been helping the family, that's wonderful. That's amazing. We are partners. We're a team. But whatever you're doing right now, whatever you're withdrawing, you need to stop. You're destroying years of work. You're ruining. I'm ruining what, exactly? Her voice developed an edge now, something sharp cutting through the ice. The empire I built while you took credit? The fortune I generated while you performed for cameras? The safety net I provided while you planned to divorce me and take half of what you thought I had? Complete silence. Yes. She let the word breathe. I know about Rachel. I know about the divorce attorneys. I know about your strategy to paint me as unstable and emotionally manipulative. I know you were planning to leave me while my mother was dying. While I was begging you to show up for her funeral. While I was crying myself to sleep in our bed, you were planning my destruction. Deborah, that's not, I wasn't, he was scrambling now, his smooth voice fractured into fragments. Those were just consultations. Just exploring options. Every married person thinks about. About what? Her voice dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. About betraying their spouse during the darkest moment of their life? About stealing from someone while pretending to love them? About choosing champagne over showing up for their partner's mother's funeral? I'm sorry. His voice broke completely. God, Deborah, I'm so sorry. You're right. About all of it. I've been selfish and blind and I've taken you for granted. But we can fix this. I can be better. I can show up. I can be the husband you deserve. Just please stop whatever you're doing. We can work through this together. We're not working through anything, Nicholas. Each word precise, final. There is no together anymore. There's you, facing the consequences of your choices. And there's me, finally free of the marriage I should have ended years ago. No. Panic flooded his voice now, raw and desperate. No, you can't mean that. We love each other. We have a life together. We have 5 years of history. You can't just throw that away because of one mistake. One mistake. Her laugh was bitter. You've been absent for years, Nicholas. Physically present, but emotionally gone. You've chosen your family over me at every significant moment. You've allowed your mother to mock my mother's background while you stood silent. You've used my body for comfort and my companionship for appearance while planning to replace me with someone shinier, newer, more exciting. That's not true. Rachel was nothing. A momentary lapse. She means nothing compared to you. Maybe. But you know what means everything to me? My mother. And you couldn't even show up for 3 hours to help me bury her. That tells me exactly where I rank in your priorities. That tells me everything I need to know about what this marriage actually is. Deborah, please. His voice cracked into something raw. I know I failed you today. I know I've failed you for years. But I'm begging you, give me a chance to make this right. Tell me what you need. I'll do anything. Anything. What I needed was for you to be there today. What I needed was for you to hold my hand while I said goodbye to my mother. What I needed was for you to choose me, just once, over your family's expectations and society's demands and your own comfort. But you couldn't. And now it's too late. It's not too late. It's never too late. We can rebuild. I can change. I can. You can face the reality of who you actually are. Her voice was steel now, unbreakable. A man who performs love but doesn't feel it. A man who takes credit for other people's work. A man who built his entire empire on his wife's invisible support and never once acknowledged her sacrifice. You're not the genius you think you are, Nicholas. You're just a man who was lucky enough to marry someone who loved him more than he deserved. Loved. He caught the past tense immediately. Deborah, please don't use past tense. Please. I love you. I know I don't show it well enough, but I do. You're my wife. You're my partner. I'm the woman you left alone at her mother's funeral. Her voice broke slightly on the last word, the first crack in her composure. I stood in an empty church, Nicholas. Empty. Not a single person from your family came. Not your mother, not your siblings, not your cousins or friends. No one. And you knew. You all knew. And you chose to celebrate anyway. I'll make it up to you. I swear to God, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Just stop what you're doing. Restore the accounts. Put everything back. We'll go to counseling. We'll take a trip. We'll do whatever you need. Just please don't destroy us. I'm not destroying us, Nicholas. Her voice steadied again, cold and clear. You destroyed us when you chose a party over my grief. I'm just making the destruction visible. I'm just removing the foundation I built so everyone can see how hollow everything actually was. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid over 5 years of marriage. The hotel will close without that support, he said quietly. The London property will be sold. Marcus's credit will be recalled. My mother will lose. Everything we've built will collapse. Yes. Simple. Final. You're willing to do that? You're willing to destroy all of it out of spite. Spite. For the first time, real anger heated her voice. You think this is spite? Nicholas, I loved you. I built empires to protect your pride. I funded your family's failures to preserve your image. I made you look brilliant while staying invisible myself because I thought that's what marriage meant. Sacrifice. Support. Selflessness. And you repaid me by leaving me alone on the worst day of my life. This isn't spite. This is self-respect. This is me finally understanding what my mother tried to tell me. I deserve so much more than what I accepted. Deborah. His voice dropped to a whisper, stripped of all performance, all manipulation, all the smooth charm he'd wielded like a weapon for 5 years. What remained was just fear, raw, desperate, real. Please don't leave me. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those words. Once, they would have cracked her resolve. Once, she would have rushed to comfort him, to fix what was broken, to sacrifice herself to ease his pain. Not anymore. Goodbye, Nicholas. She ended the call. The silence in her apartment was absolute. Sacred. Final. Her phone immediately lit up with his calls again. She watched it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then she powered it off completely. Outside, December darkness was falling. The city lights flickered to life, each one a small act of faith that tomorrow would come. Deborah stood at the window, looking out at the world her mother would never see again, and made a promise to the woman who taught her that strength didn't require permission and worth didn't require validation. I'm free, Mama. Finally free. The phone stayed dark. The Betts family stayed panicked. And Deborah stayed strong. The emergency board meeting had the atmosphere of a funeral, except funerals carried more dignity. 17 board members sat around the marble conference table, their faces ranging from furious to terrified. Nicholas stood at the head of the table where he delivered countless presentations about vision and growth and unstoppable momentum. Now he was delivering explanations no one wanted to hear. The situation is temporary, he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. We're experiencing a liquidity issue that... A liquidity issue? Gordon Hartwick, the longest-serving board member, slammed a folder onto the table. Nicholas, 3 of our primary investment accounts have been drained. The hotel is hemorrhaging money. Our London property is being sold out from under us. Our stock dropped 47% when markets opened this morning. This isn't a liquidity issue. This is a catastrophic collapse. I'm working with our attorneys to reverse. To reverse what? Patricia Chun, the board's financial analyst, pulled up a presentation on the screen behind Nicholas. I spent the weekend tracing our funding sources. Do you know what I found? Approximately 63% of Betts Global's operational capital over the past 5 years came from entities owned by your wife. Your wife, Nicholas. Not family holdings. Not legitimate investors. Your wife's personal companies. The room erupted. Voices overlapping, accusations flying, the careful professional veneer cracking completely. You let your wife fund this company? Did you even know? How could you not know where hundreds of millions were coming from? This is fraud. This is. It's not fraud. Harrison Cole, the attorney, spoke from the corner where he'd been observing silently. Mrs. Betts invested legitimately through properly structured entities. Everything was legal. Mr. Betts simply didn't realize the source. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. You didn't know. Gordon's voice was flat with disbelief. You've been taking credit for saving this company, for visionary leadership, for strategic genius, and you didn't even know your wife was funding everything? Nicholas felt his face flush hot. The investments came through legitimate channels. Professional entities with proper channels your wife controlled. Patricia pulled up another slide. Meridian Holdings, Greenfield Property Group, Aurora Energy Solutions, Stellar Finance. All registered to Deborah Betts, née Green. All established before your marriage. She's worth approximately $340 million, and somehow in 5 years of marriage, you never noticed. The judgment in the room was suffocating. The question now, Gordon continued, is whether this board can maintain confidence in leadership that was fundamentally unaware of its own financial infrastructure. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence and Nicholas Betts's removal as CEO. Seconded, Patricia said immediately. Wait, Nicholas raised his hands. You can't do this. I've led this company through nothing. Gordon's voice was ice. Your wife led this company. You just showed up for the credit. All in favor of removing Nicholas Betts as CEO. 16 hands rose. 1 abstention, Marcus's friend, who looked apologetic but said nothing. Motion carries. Nicholas, you're out. Security will escort you from the building. You have 1 hour to collect your personal items. The anchor's face filled screens across the city, across the country, eventually across the world. Breaking news in the Betts global scandal. Documents reveal that Deborah Betts, wife of now former CEO Nicholas Betts, secretly financed the majority of the company's expansion over 5 years. Sources indicate Mrs. Betts withdrew all support over the weekend, triggering what analysts are calling one of the most dramatic corporate collapses in recent history. Stock prices have fallen 72%. The company faces multiple lawsuits from investors claiming fraud and misrepresentation. The family had gathered again, but this time there was no party atmosphere, no champagne, no celebration. Just 3 siblings and their mother, surrounded by luxury they could no longer afford to maintain. This is your fault. Camilla screamed at Nicholas, her perfect makeup smeared from crying. My boutique investment is gone. $300,000. Just gone. The guarantor withdrew and the bank seized everything. My tech company is bankrupt, Marcus said, his voice hollow. Payroll bounced. Employees are suing. My investors are demanding their money back. 4 years of work, destroyed because you married some woman who was secretly funding all of us. I didn't know. Nicholas shouted back. How many times do I have to say it? I didn't know she had money. You didn't know because you never bothered to know her. Victoria's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. You married her because she was pretty and made you feel important. You never asked about her work. Never questioned where convenient solutions came from. Never wondered why every crisis somehow resolved itself. You told me to marry her. Nicholas rounded on his mother. You said she was perfect. Good breeding potential. Wouldn't compete with family importance. You approved. I approved of someone I thought was nobody. Victoria's composure shattered completely. Someone we could control. Someone who'd be grateful for the Betts name. Not some secret millionaire who was playing us all for fools. She wasn't playing us. Harrison's voice came from the doorway, where he'd been listening to the family tear itself apart. She was supporting you. Funding your failures. Protecting your image. And you repaid her by leaving her alone at her mother's funeral. Shut up, Victoria hissed. You work for us. You don't get to lecture. I worked for you. Harrison's correction was pointed. Past tense. My retainer was paid by Meridian Holdings. Which means I was actually working for Mrs. Betts this entire time. And frankly, watching this family implode is giving me a new appreciation for her decision to walk away. He left, closing the door on their shocked silence. Marcus threw a priceless vase against the wall. It shattered, scattering crystal fragments across imported marble floors they'd soon have to sell. "We have to get her back," Camilla said desperately. "We have to convince her to restore the funding. Nicholas, you have to fix this." "How?" Nicholas's voice cracked. "She won't answer my calls. She's blocked all communication. She's..." His phone buzzed. A news alert. His hands shook as he opened it. The interview was with Financial Times, published just minutes ago. A photograph showed Deborah looking directly at the camera, composed, elegant, powerful in a way she'd never allowed herself to appear during their marriage. Nicholas read her words with growing horror. "For 5 years, I supported my husband's business ventures because I believed in our partnership. I provided capital, connections, and strategic guidance while remaining invisible because I thought that's what love required. I was wrong. Love shouldn't require invisibility. Partnership shouldn't require self-erasure. When my mother died and my husband chose a Christmas party over her funeral, I realized I'd been building someone else's empire while neglecting my own worth. I'm correcting that now." The reporter had asked, "Do you regret helping them?" Her response, "I regret staying silent about it. I regret letting my husband take credit for work I did. I regret accepting less than I deserved because I was afraid being powerful would threaten his fragile ego. But I don't regret leaving. That's the first decision I've made in years that I'm truly proud of." While Nicholas's world burned, Deborah stood beside her mother's grave in perfect stillness. The headstone had been installed that morning, simple, elegant, exactly what Patricia would have wanted. The December sun broke through clouds, casting golden light across the cemetery. Deborah had brought fresh flowers, lilies and roses, her mother's favorites. She arranged them carefully at the base of the headstone, her movements unhurried, peaceful. "The world knows now, Mama," she said softly. "They know who I really am. Who I've always been. And they're shocked because I let them underestimate me. I let Nicholas take credit. I stayed invisible because I thought that's what made me noble." She sat on the cold ground, not caring about her expensive coat, not caring about appearances. "But you were right. Silence isn't strength when it enables disrespect. Sacrifice isn't love when it's demanded rather than offered freely. I built their empire, and when they couldn't even show up for your funeral, I finally understood. I was never building for us. I was building for them while they took everything and gave nothing back." The wind rustled through bare trees, carrying the scent of winter and endings and new beginnings. "I'm free now. Financially free. Emotionally free. Free from the performance of being Nicholas Betts's supportive wife. Free from Victoria's judgment and Camilla's dismissal and Marcus's demands. Free from the cage I built with my own hands because I was too afraid to be powerful." She placed her hand on the cold stone. "Thank you for teaching me that I could be more. Thank you for working yourself to exhaustion so I could have opportunities. Thank you for questioning my marriage when I needed to hear it, even though I wasn't ready to listen. And thank you for your last words. They saved me." A car pulled up at the cemetery gates, a black Mercedes, engine running, someone inside but not approaching. Deborah didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Nicholas had finally come to the funeral. 3 days late. After being fired. After his family's collapse. After the media exposure. After losing everything. He'd come when it cost him nothing to show up, when the damage was already complete, when his presence was worthless except as evidence of his own devastating miscalculation. Deborah stood, brushed off her coat, and picked up her purse. She'd said everything she needed to say to her mother. Everything else was just noise. She walked toward her car, parked on the opposite side of the cemetery from Nicholas's Mercedes. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. Behind her, she heard a car door open. Footsteps on gravel. Nicholas's voice calling her name across the distance. "Deborah." Wait. Please. She didn't turn around. Didn't pause. Didn't acknowledge him. He reached the cemetery gates just as her car disappeared around the corner, leaving him standing alone at the entrance to a funeral that had ended days ago. He'd arrived too late. The way he'd arrived too late for everything that had ever truly mattered. Developing story: Betts Global has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company's board issued a statement saying they were unaware of the extent of their dependency on external funding sources and are exploring all options for restructuring. Former CEO Nicholas Betts was unavailable for comment. Meanwhile, Deborah Betts has announced the establishment of the Patricia Green Foundation, dedicated to providing educational opportunities for children of service workers. The foundation's initial endowment, $75 million. The empire had crumbled. The truth had emerged. And Deborah, quiet, graceful, systematically underestimated, had finally stepped into the light. Not as Nicholas Betts's wife, but as herself. Powerful. Free. Unbreakable. The office space was modest but hers, paid for with her own money, decorated with her own taste, filled with a kind of quiet competence Nicholas had never noticed when they were married. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but Deborah sat with her back to the view, focused on the paperwork spread across her desk. Foundation documents. Investment portfolios. The architecture of her new life, built on the rubble of her old one. Her assistant, Margaret, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd worked for Deborah's companies for years without Nicholas ever knowing she existed, knocked softly on the open door. "Mrs. Betts? He's here again." Deborah didn't need to ask who. Nicholas had been showing up every day since the funeral, waiting in the building lobby like a ghost haunting the scene of his own death. Security had strict instructions: observe but don't engage. Let him sit. Let him wait. Let him understand what it felt like to be ignored. How long has he been there? 3 hours. He looks. Margaret paused, searching for the right word. Broken. Deborah felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not pity. Just the hollow clarity that comes after grief burns away everything except truth. Tell security he can wait as long as he likes. I'm not seeing him. Margaret nodded and turned to leave, then hesitated. He's been crying, ma'am. In public. People are taking photos. Good. The word emerged flat, final. Let them see what desperation looks like. Let them witness the collapse of a man who thought he was invincible. After Margaret left, Deborah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. But she knew immediately who it was. Nicholas had been burning through new phones and borrowed devices, trying any possible avenue to reach her. The message was long, frantic, stripped of the smooth charm he'd once wielded so effortlessly. "Deborah, I'm begging you. Please see me. Just 5 minutes. I need to explain. I need to apologize properly. I know I failed you. I know I destroyed us. But there has to be a way forward. There has to be something I can do. The prenup, my lawyers say it's ironclad. They say I have no legal recourse. But we're still married. We still have history. Please. I have nowhere else to go. My family has turned their backs. The board fired me. I'm losing everything. Please don't do this. Please." She read it twice, analyzing the desperation like a forensic scientist examining evidence. Every word was about him. His needs. His losses. His pain. Even in his lowest moment, even when begging for mercy, Nicholas couldn't step outside himself long enough to actually see her. She typed a response. Short. Precise. Devastating. The prenup leaves you with nothing. She hit send and watched the message status change to delivered, then read. 3 dots appeared immediately. Disappeared. Reappeared. He was struggling to formulate a response, struggling to process what she'd just confirmed. His reply came in fragments. "What do you mean nothing?" "My lawyer said minimal support, but I'd still retain." "Deborah, what are you saying?" She typed with steady fingers. "Read it." Actually read it. All 28 pages. The document you signed 5 years ago without a single question. The document your mother insisted on because she was terrified I'd take what was yours. Read it, Nicholas. See who actually wrote it. Harrison Cole had seen desperate men before. Men who'd lost fortunes, men who destroyed families, men who'd gambled everything and lost. But watching Nicholas Betts read through his own prenuptial agreement with dawning horror was something else entirely. This can't be right. Nicholas's hands shook as he turned pages. This can't be legal. It's completely legal. Harrison's voice carried no sympathy. Ironclad, actually. Expertly written. I'd say it's some of the best contract work I've seen. But it says. Nicholas's voice cracked. It says in the event of divorce initiated by either party, I retain only assets I brought into the marriage. Personal earnings during marriage default to community property, but any assets purchased with commingled funds require documentation proving my direct financial contribution. Correct. The penthouse was purchased with a loan I assumed was from my family trust. According to this, if the actual source was external funding, it reverts to the funding entity. Also correct. Nicholas flipped frantically through pages. The cars. The vacation property. The country club membership. The art collection. Everything. All of it has the same clause. Proof of direct financial contribution, or it's not mine. Yes. But I don't have proof. The words emerged hollow. I never tracked where money came from. I assumed it was family wealth. Company profits. I never questioned. You never questioned because your wife made sure you didn't have to. Harrison pulled up documents on his computer. I've spent the weekend tracing fund sources. Every major purchase you thought was yours was actually funded by her companies. The penthouse down payment came from Greenfield Property Group. The European cars were leased through Aurora Holdings. The vacation home in Aspen was purchased by Meridian Real Estate Trust. You've been living in her wealth for 5 years while thinking it was yours. Nicholas's face had gone white. Who wrote this prenup? Harrison pulled up the document metadata. It was drafted by Sterling and Associates, one of the most prestigious family law firms in the state. But according to the engagement letter. He paused, letting the weight settle. The client who hired them and directed the terms wasn't your mother. It was Deborah. The silence in the office was absolute. Deborah wrote her own prenup. Technically, the lawyers wrote it. But yes, she directed every clause. Every protection. Every contingency. Your mother thought she was protecting Bet's family assets. She never realized Deborah was protecting her own. Nicholas's hands dropped to his lap, the documents sliding from his fingers to scatter across the floor. She played us. From the beginning, she played us. No. Harrison's correction was sharp. She protected herself from people who saw her as an acquisition rather than a person. There's a difference. Your mother demanded a prenup because she was terrified some cleaning lady's daughter would steal Bet's wealth. Deborah agreed because she knew she had nothing to protect, or so she let you think. She let you believe you were marrying down. Let you feel superior. Let you take credit for her success. And she documented everything so that when this moment came, you'd have nothing to stand on. This moment. Nicholas looked up. You think she planned this? Planned to destroy me. I think she planned to protect herself from destruction. And when you failed her at the most critical moment of her life, she activated protection she'd hoped she'd never need. Nicholas's phone buzzed. Another message from Deborah. Your mother insisted on the prenup. She was terrified I'd take what was yours. I agreed immediately, enthusiastically even. I wrote every word of it through my attorneys. You signed without reading because you were so confident there was nothing for me to take. You were right. But you were wrong about who had nothing to lose. Nicholas stood in what had been his home for 3 years, staring at the eviction notice taped to the door. 30 days to vacate. Property ownership transferring to Greenfield Property Group. All personal items to be removed before final transfer date. Inside, movers hired by Deborah's property management company were already boxing his belongings. Efficient, professional, completely impersonal. They worked with the cold precision of people removing obstacles rather than handling someone's life. The cars, he asked the property manager overseeing the process. Being repossessed. Lease agreements terminated. The art. Owned by Aurora Holdings. Being relocated to storage. The furniture. Purchased with funds from Meridian accounts. Stays with the property. Nicholas walked through rooms that suddenly felt like a museum of his own delusions. The kitchen where Deborah had cooked meals while he took business calls. The bedroom where she'd cried herself to sleep while he planned his exit strategy. The balcony where they'd hosted parties, where he'd performed the role of successful husband while she'd stood silent, invisible, essential. His phone rang. Marcus. Nicholas, I need you to talk to her. My attorney says the guarantor recall on my credit line is legal. I have to pay back $4.7 million immediately or file bankruptcy. Mom's London property sold for less than expected. She's facing tax consequences. Camilla lost her boutique and is moving back in with Mom. We're falling apart. You have to fix this. I can't fix this. Nicholas's voice was hollow. I have nothing. She took everything because it was always hers. We've been living in her empire, and I didn't even know it. Then beg her. Grovel. Do whatever it takes to. Nicholas hung up. He couldn't listen to Marcus's desperation when his own felt like it was drowning him. He dialed Deborah's number one last time, knowing she wouldn't answer, needing to try anyway. It rang once, then diverted to a message. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. She'd changed her number. Severed the final thread connecting them. He called from a different phone, his assistant's device, borrowed for this exact purpose. It rang through. She answered on the fourth ring. Deborah, his voice broke immediately. Please. Please don't hang up. Silence. But she was there. He could hear her breathing. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I know I destroyed us. But I'm asking, no, I'm begging, for one last conversation. Face to face. Let me apologize properly. Let me. No. Her voice was quiet but absolute. Just 5 minutes. Please. I've lost everything. My job, my home, my family. I have nowhere to go. Nothing left. You've won. Completely. Utterly. Just please, show me the mercy I didn't show you. Mercy. She repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter. You want mercy. Where was mercy when my mother was dying? Where was mercy when I begged you to show up for her funeral? Where was mercy when you were planning to divorce me while I was grieving? I was wrong. God, Deborah, I was so wrong. About everything. I see that now. I see you now. I see what I had and what I destroyed. Please don't make me lose you completely. Nicholas. She said his name like a final summation, like a closing argument. You didn't lose me. You were never there to begin with. The words landed like a blade through everything he'd been telling himself, that this was salvageable, that he could win her back, that love conquered mistakes. That's not true. I loved you. I love you. Love is presence, Nicholas. Her voice remained eerily calm. Love is showing up. Love is choosing your partner when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, costly. Love is standing beside someone during their darkest moment, even when there are champagne toasts and Christmas parties calling your name. You were never present. Not really. You performed presence when it benefited you, but you were never actually there. I can change. I can be better. I can. You can be better for someone else. The finality in her voice was crushing. You can learn from this and do better in your next relationship. But you don't get to practice being a decent human being on me anymore. I'm done being your training ground for empathy you should have developed years ago. Deborah, please. Goodbye, Nicholas. The line went dead. He called back immediately. Straight to a recorded message, "This number has been blocked." He stood in the penthouse, not his penthouse, never his penthouse, surrounded by boxes holding the remnants of a life that had never been real. His phone buzzed. One final text from Deborah's lawyer. "Final settlement documents attached. You retain personal effects purchased before marriage. Everything else reverts to original funding sources. Divorce papers will be filed Friday. Don't contact our client again. Any further attempts will be considered harassment." Nicholas sank to the floor, his back against the wall, and understood with devastating clarity what he'd actually lost. Not wealth. Not status. Not the empire he'd thought was his. He'd lost the one person who'd actually loved him enough to build empires to protect his pride. And he'd lost her because when she needed him most, when love was tested by grief and loss and desperation, he'd chosen champagne over presents. He'd chosen everything except her. And now, with perfect justice, he had nothing. Deborah had been visiting her mother's grave every afternoon since the funeral. Not from obligation or guilt, but from a need for connection, to talk to the woman who'd taught her that silence could be a weapon and worth didn't require validation. She was arranging fresh roses when she heard footsteps on the gravel path behind her. Beautiful flowers. The voice was warm, unhurried. "Your mother would be proud." Deborah turned to find a man in his late 30s, wearing work clothes dusted with sawdust, carrying a toolbox. His face was kind, the kind of face that suggested he'd seen suffering and chosen gentleness anyway. Dark eyes that actually saw her, not through her or past her, but genuinely saw her. "I'm James Chun," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Cemetery carpenter. I built your mother's headstone base. I wanted to make sure it was settling properly." She shook his hand, noting the strength tempered with care. "It's beautiful work. Thank you." He knelt beside the grave, checking the foundation with practiced efficiency. "I remember your mother, actually. She used to visit her sister's grave here, about 3 years ago, before she got too sick. Always brought flowers. Always stopped to talk to other people visiting their loved ones. She had this way of making everyone feel less alone in their grief." Deborah's throat tightened. "That sounds exactly like her. She told me about you once." James smiled at the memory. Said her daughter was brilliant, kind, and far too willing to make herself small for other people's comfort. She hoped you'd learn to take up space before it was too late. The tears came without warning, not the desperate, broken sobs from the funeral, but something quieter, cleaner. Grief mixed with gratitude that her mother had been seen, had been remembered, had left impressions on people Deborah had never known existed. James handed her a handkerchief, actual cloth, not paper, and waited in comfortable silence while she composed herself. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I don't usually fall apart in front of strangers." Grief isn't falling apart. It's feeling everything you've been too strong to feel before. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "And we're not strangers. We both loved Patricia. That makes us something." There was no performance in his words. No agenda. No calculation. Just simple human connection offered without expectation of return. It was the most radical thing Deborah had experienced in years. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" The words left her mouth before she'd fully processed them. "I mean, not as a date. Just as someone who knew my mother. Someone who remembers her." James's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way Nicholas's never had. "I'd like that. And for what it's worth, if it turned into a date eventually, I wouldn't mind that either." The office space was in a renovated building in the neighborhood where Deborah had grown up, where her mother had cleaned homes and raised her daughter and dreamed of better possibilities. The walls were painted warm colors, the furniture comfortable but practical, everything designed to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. Margaret stood beside Deborah, reviewing applications for the Foundation's first scholarship program. "We have 247 applications," Margaret said, her voice tight with emotion. "Single mothers going back to school. Daughters of service workers. Women who've been told they're not college material because of where they came from or what their parents did for a living." Deborah read through the applications, seeing her own story reflected in different handwriting, different circumstances, same fundamental struggle, women fighting to be more than what the world expected them to be. Fund them all, she said quietly. Margaret looked up sharply. All of them? That's over $6 million in the first year alone. Then it's $6 million well spent. Deborah smiled. My mother cleaned homes so I could go to school. She worked herself to death so I could have opportunities. If this foundation can be for other women what she was for me, then every penny is worth it. She moved to the window overlooking the street where she'd once walked to school, where Patricia had waited at bus stops after double shifts, where their modest life had contained more love than the penthouse ever had. The housing initiative? Deborah asked. Purchased the old Riverside complex. Renovations start next week. 30 units for single mothers. Below market rent. Childcare on site. Job training programs. Everything your mother would have needed when she was raising you. Deborah nodded, feeling pieces of herself clicking back into place. Not the pieces that had broken when Nicholas left, but older pieces, truer pieces, the ones she'd abandoned when she tried to make herself fit into the Betts family's world. And my companies? All restructured under the Greenfield Holdings umbrella. No more hidden ownership. No more silent partnerships. Your name on everything. The board wants to meet next week to discuss expansion into. No. Deborah's voice was firm. No expansion yet. First, we do this right. Fair wages. Ethical practices. Products that actually help people instead of just generating profit. I'm done building empires. I'm interested in building something that matters. Nicholas sat on the edge of a sagging mattress in a $40 a night motel room, staring at divorce papers he couldn't afford to contest. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and broken dreams, a far cry from the penthouse with its city views and imported marble. His phone, a cheap prepaid device, the only one he could afford now, sat silent on the nightstand. No calls from his mother, who'd made it clear he was an embarrassment to the family name. No messages from Marcus or Camilla, who were too busy managing their own financial disasters to care about his. The television played local news on mute. Footage of the Patricia Green Foundation's opening ceremony. Deborah cutting a ribbon, surrounded by smiling women and children, looking more radiant than she'd ever looked during their marriage. The crawler at the bottom of the screen. Businesswoman Deborah Green launches $100 million foundation to support women and families. Green, formerly known as Deborah Betts, recently divorced from disgraced CEO Nicholas Betts. He reached for the remote to change the channel, then stopped. He needed to see this. Needed to understand what he'd actually lost. Deborah spoke on screen, her voice clear and strong. My mother taught me that worth isn't determined by who loves you or who validates you. It's determined by how you show up for yourself and others. This foundation is about showing up, for women who've been made invisible, for mothers who sacrifice everything, for daughters who deserve better than what they've been told to accept. Nicholas watched her transform from the quiet wife he'd dismissed into the powerful woman she'd always been. The woman he'd never bothered to see. The segment ended. A commercial for car insurance played. Nicholas lay back on the thin pillow and stared at water stains on the ceiling, understanding with devastating clarity that he hadn't just lost Deborah. He'd never actually had her. He'd had a performance. A woman playing the role of devoted wife while protecting herself from the people who saw her as an acquisition rather than a person. The real Deborah, brilliant, powerful, revolutionary, had been there all along. He'd just been too arrogant to notice. Deborah stood in the church entrance where she'd stood alone just 2 weeks ago, staring at empty pews and her mother's coffin. The space looked different now, warmer somehow, less like a monument to abandonment and more like a place where something had ended so something else could begin. Father Reynolds approached, his weathered face creasing with a genuine smile. Mrs. Betts, or should I say Ms. Green, I heard about the foundation. Your mother would be so proud. Just Deborah, she said softly. And thank you for being here when no one else was. For giving my mother the dignity she deserved. She raised a remarkable daughter. He gestured to the nave. Would you like to come in? Say a prayer. Actually, I just needed to see it again. To remember what it felt like to stand here alone. To remember the moment everything changed. She walked to where she'd stood beside the coffin, her heels clicking on marble floors that had echoed with emptiness. But the emptiness felt different now, not hollow but spacious. Room to breathe. Room to grow. Room to become whoever she wanted to be without shrinking herself to fit someone else's expectations. Her phone buzzed. A text from James. Coffee tomorrow? There's a place near the cemetery that makes terrible coffee but great conversation. Interested? She smiled and typed back, terrible coffee sounds perfect. Father Reynolds watched her with knowing eyes. You look different than you did at the funeral. Lighter somehow. I am lighter. Deborah turned to face him. I spent 5 years carrying the weight of other people's empires, other people's failures, other people's expectations. I built myself into a foundation for someone else's life. When I withdrew everything, everyone assumed I was destroying. But I wasn't destroying anything. She walked toward the entrance, toward the sunlight streaming through open doors, toward the life waiting outside. I was reclaiming. She paused in the doorway, silhouetted against December sunlight that painted her in gold and possibility. Behind her, the cathedral with its empty pews and painful memories. Ahead, a city she'd helped build and was now rebuilding on her own terms. When I withdrew everything, she said to no one and everyone, her voice carrying through the sacred space, I didn't lose my life. She stepped into the sunlight, her shoulders back, her head high, her heart finally free. I reclaimed it. The cathedral doors closed softly behind her. Deborah Green walked into her future, not as someone's wife, not as someone's silent benefactor, not as someone's invisible foundation, but as herself. Powerful. Free. Unbreakable. And finally, gloriously, completely her own. 6 months later, the Patricia Green Foundation had funded 247 scholarships, housed 83 families, and launched job training programs in 12 cities. Deborah's companies thrived under ethical leadership that prioritized people over profit. Nicholas Betts worked in sales at a mid-tier real estate firm, living in a modest apartment, learning humility one rejection at a time. And Deborah? She had coffee with James every Sunday morning, built empires that actually mattered, and never again made herself small for someone else's comfort. She'd learned what her mother always knew: true power doesn't require permission. Worth doesn't need validation. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is walk away from people who can't see your value. She withdrew everything. And in doing so, she gained herself. 6 months later, the Patricia Green Foundation had funded 247 scholarships, housed 83 families, and launched job training programs in 12 cities. Deborah's companies thrived under her leadership, ethical, transparent, powerful. Nicholas worked in sales at a mid-tier real estate firm, living in a modest apartment, learning humility one rejection at a time. The Betts family empire had crumbled completely, sold off piece by piece to pay debts they never knew they owed. And Deborah? She had coffee with James every Sunday morning, built businesses that actually mattered, and never again made herself small for someone else's comfort. She'd learned what her mother always knew: true power doesn't require permission, worth doesn't need validation, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from people who can't see your value. She withdrew everything. And in doing so, she gained herself. And that, my beautiful family, is how a woman who was made invisible finally became unforgettable. Deborah spent 5 years building someone else's empire while staying in the shadows, believing that love meant sacrifice, that partnership meant silence, that being a good wife meant erasing herself. She funded fortunes, saved businesses, and protected a man who couldn't even show up when her mother died. But here's the truth that changed everything. Strength isn't measured by how much you can carry for others. It's measured by knowing when to put it down. Her mother, Patricia, worked herself to exhaustion so her daughter could rise. And with her final words, she gave Deborah permission to do what she'd been too afraid to do for years: remember her worth. Not the worth Nicholas assigned her. Not the worth his family acknowledged. Her own worth. The kind that doesn't need validation, doesn't need applause, doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. Nicholas lost everything because he never realized what he had. He married a queen and treated her like a servant. He built his life on her foundation and never once looked down to see who was holding him up. And when she finally withdrew her support, he discovered the devastating truth: he was never the empire. She was. So if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever sacrificed yourself to build someone else's dream, if you've ever stayed silent to keep the peace while your soul screamed for recognition, hear this. Your presence is not a supporting role. You are the main character of your own story. Deborah didn't destroy Nicholas by leaving. She freed herself by refusing to stay invisible. She reclaimed her power not through revenge, but through self-respect. And she built a legacy that would honor her mother's sacrifice, not by staying small, but by finally taking up the space she deserved. If this story stirred something in your spirit, click subscribe, type "I reclaim my worth" in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. Because every person watching this right now deserves to be seen, valued, and celebrated, not for what you can provide others, but for who you are when nobody's watching. Your mother's sacrifices weren't meant to make you smaller. They were meant to show you that you could be greater. Until next time, this is Mr. Crown Stories, reminding you, you are not the foundation for someone else's empire. You are the architect of your own. You are seen. You are powerful. And you were never meant to stay invisible. Now go build something worth your name.